hopelessness and joblessness. They are the tinder. They are the kerosene.
South Florida in the national spotlight as the National Urban League Conference focuses on education, jobs, and justice. The CEO, Mark Morial, is live with us this morning.
This vital work has been my work, too.
We gave more people the tools.
On record and rhetoric, the candidates come to town for the first time on the same stage. Who showed and who scored?
Miami Beach Mayor Philip Levine live on the show this morning to defend the Relentless for Progress Political Action Committee. I slammed that committee last week for their fundraising tactics. This morning, the mayor is here to respond.
Good morning. Welcome. South Florida seemed like the center of the news world this week. It certainly was the center of discussion on saving our cities.
That was the theme of the National Urban League's annual conference held in Fort Lauderdale Wednesday through Saturday, and more than 8,000 people were in attendance at the conference. And for the first time, top-tier presidential candidates took the same stage, one after the other, facing an engaged audience of voters demanding action on some of the country's and South Florida's most vexing issues.
Mark Morial was at the head of it all. He is president and CEO of the National Urban League, the nation's largest and many say most effective civil rights organization. He's also the proud former mayor of New Orleans. Here live with us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Did you sleep this weekend at all?
I slept last night and I got to walk on the beach.
Oh,
so I'm
wow.
good.
Got it in
The
there.
beautiful Fort Lauderdale
see.
beach.
Well, both Glenna and I attended parts of your conference this week. It was intense, it was fun, it was stimulating. What comes out of this conference?
So,
where do you go from here?
What comes out of this conference is this is really the annual meeting of the Urban League movement, which is reflected of 2 million people served through 90-plus sites around the nation. The Urban League of Broward County is an example of what we have in communities across the nation.
Jermaine Smith-Baugh is the very effective president.
Outstanding, and thank her and her team for what they did. The highlight of this week, no doubt, was the 5 presidential candidates. Right. And the fact that they were here and they addressed, each in their own way, the issues of education, jobs, and justice, the issues of race and racial disparities. And I think the people got a chance to know them better. So I think all 5 who came were winners. I think those who chose not to come, well, maybe they didn't win this week.
I will say I was there for all 5, took a little unscientific pop poll of people afterwards, and what I heard were people were surprisingly, that was my assessment, surprisingly, refreshingly impressed with Jeb Bush and what he had to say.
I think Jeb Bush was the first candidate to commit to this forum. Hillary Clinton right on his heels. And I think that Jeb Bush has stated that he is thinking long term and that the Republican Party needs to reach out more broadly to a more diverse group of people. But this is what I'll say. The presidency today, the route to the presidency today is through a multi-dimensional, multiracial coalition. The country is diverse, it's varied. You need multiple generations, you need multiple regions, you need multiple genders and ethnicities. Right. You got to put all that together to count to 50 or to win an electoral college 270.
Right. Well, Jeb Bush had said when he announced, I am going to campaign for every vote. I'm not ceding any votes, ethnic, religious, whatever. I am going to seek those votes, and he put his body where his mouth was by showing up, and I think Glenna's right. I think that he did himself some good. His critics won't be persuaded, but the fact that he even just showed up.
I think showing up is the first step, and I think what it means for him is that throughout the course of a long campaign, people are going to, I think, be more willing to listen to what he has to say. Now, his record and the record of all the candidates, their record in prior political office is going to come under intense scrutiny and examination. But that's what we want in the democratic process.
Well, can we talk about that a little bit? Jeb Bush's record as governor of Florida is kind of a mixed bag for African Americans. And I think what I heard him talk about was all of what he did and not what he didn't do, or what he did that might have been adversely affecting African Americans, like make it make the voting standards a little tougher. And so what was the takeaway
And look,
when you from that
voter
speech?
suppression, making it more difficult for people to vote is not going to be something that any of us are going to be able to support. And that's what I mean. His record is going to be examined, but let's be honest, when you run for the presidency, you also have an opportunity to, if you will, not run away from your record, but to state where you may stand as President of the United States. So I think Jeb Bush, the most important thing for Jeb, and I think to some extent Ben Carson being Republicans, is that they opened the door and said, look, I'm willing to have a conversation. I think people still have great doubts, but the idea here is we're early in this campaign. Certainly a Hillary Clinton being very familiar to many people, having been to the Urban League before, you know, has a lot of natural support and a natural enthusiasm. And I think there was a great deal of enthusiasm for the way she was very direct and specific about what she addressed. Martin O'Malley, Bernie Sanders, first time many people had an opportunity to hear them.
Right. Mark, let me ask you about this. Your conference comes just a little more than a month after this tragic, horrendous massacre of 9 African Americans at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, by an avowed white supremacist. And there's been, maybe at the Memorial Home, maybe there's been this discussion, I think at kitchen tables all over this country. Was that an anomaly, or is that symptomatic of pervasive, persistent, and ugly racism in this country?
We would like to sense that it's an anomaly, but the fact is that there are literally hundreds of hate groups that operate in the shadows here in the United States. They operate online. They are, in my view, domestic terrorists, because what they're doing is, in some cases, thinking, planning, talking about violence against people as a part of a political agenda.
Right, and this guy, Dylan Roof, admitted that he went to that one website which spews racism and white supremacism, and thanks to the Southern Poverty Law Center, among others, that expose that site and others.
An enormous job for many, many years bringing light to these hate groups. And what we've got to do is we've got to encourage the Justice Department and local law enforcement to take action when they violate the law, not to treat this as something other than something very serious. But I also think parents and leaders in this community also have to preach, promote, and teach tolerance and understanding, civility. I'm concerned about the entire cycle and epidemic of violence that we see in this country.
And while much of it, of course, is due to the easy availability of guns, and when you get young kids who are maybe gangbangers, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, whatever they are, and they've got these guns in Liberty City here in Miami-Dade County. At one period, there was a 3-month spate of gun violence, and I think, you know, in the vicinity, 60 people were shot, and about 2/3 of them died.
That's why we need sensible gun safety laws, and I don't think sensible gun safety laws are inconsistent with the Second Amendment or the Constitution of the United States. We've got to save lives. Mass killings, whether it's Dylan Roof, whether it's the Colorado movie theater, going all the way back to schools in Columbine or Newtown, are tragedies for this country. And sensible gun safety laws are not going to solve it all, but are one step we could take, I think, to honor the memory of the victims.
You know, there was a town hall meeting, I think is what you called it, on Sunday afternoon. It didn't get the press that the candidates got, but it was so interesting, called Save Our Brothers and Sisters. And it was a packed house and a panel talking about how does the millennial generation reach out, conduct themselves, engage other people in the Black Lives Matter movement. And what I found really fascinating, and I would love to hear you address, is the people at your conference are the engaged people. They were speaking to the choir. How do you engage everybody else? We
are hoping that because they're engaged and inspired, that they'll go back to local communities, take away what they discuss, take away what they learn. Many of our Youth Summit participants who were part of that panel discussion on Friday afternoon are people who participate in the Urban League's after-school programs here in Broward and all across the country. We've got to lift up those young people who are engaged and encourage them to lead others so that others will follow. The young people and the millennials are one, I think they have a real interest in social justice and civil rights, but there's a lot of anxiety about even those who go to school, finish school, go to college, get a degree, can they get the opportunity of their dreams?
We heard that.
And we've got to focus on jobs in this country.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I know Glenna's got other questions, so stay with us. We're going to come back with Mark Morial of the National Urban League in just a minute.
We are back with Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, right off the conference in Fort Lauderdale. We were talking about, in the last segment, we started to talk about jobs and justice. I think the theme was education, jobs, and justice, saving our cities. Really quickly, Jeb Bush, one of the candidates, one of the 5 to speak, was sort of talking about his record as governor and what he did for the African American community. Really quickly, let's listen to him for a second.
We gave more people the tools to move up in the world through adult education and workforce training. We expanded our community college system and made it more affordable for low-income families. Florida in those years helped thousands more first-generation college students make it all the way to graduation. We didn't lose sight of the ones who had missed their chance at a better life, or maybe even lost their way and landed in jail. In Florida, we didn't want to fill prisons with nonviolent offenders. So we expanded drug courts. They started here in Florida, and we expanded them all across the state, and we created prevention programs.
Well, you can't naysay anything that former Governor Bush said there. He did. I mean, I covered all those years, the 8 years of his governorship. Of course, he also did away with affirmative action at the state universities, and there was a huge sit-in demonstrations at his office from then Congress or then State Representative Kendrick Meek. A lot of anger in the black community over that. But let me back up here, Mark. Before we began and you arrived this morning, you were saying you have an idea to help young black men get to work.
Young people, especially young black men, but not exclusively young black men. I think we have to create work experiences for young people as early as possible. And early as possible, I mean 15, 16, 17, or 18 years of age. So I think we ought to incorporate work experience into the high school curriculum, where a young person might be able to work 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week, earn a paycheck, and get graded on the participation. In other words, what we've got to do is get young people into the workforce as soon as possible. Right now, 1 of every 5 young people in this nation between 16 and 24 is neither in school nor working. That's about 7 million disconnected young people, and that's of all races, backgrounds, disproportionately black and brown. We need to be focused on that part of our community and help that part of the community find a way to develop their skills and accomplish, if you will, the type of, if you will, skills that makes them and gives them the chance to be permanently employed.
All right, so this could be anything from being coding, working on computers, to learning to be an electrician, to a plumber,
you can work in a law firm, you can work in a hospital, you can work in a television station.
Right.
I think we've got to do those things. Those things, though, here's what you see with the idea. You see a lot of ideas, but let's be honest, it's going to take a reprioritization of where we invest. 80 million in this country on prisons. Imagine if we shifted 1 out of every 4 prison dollars to programmatics and initiatives to like this, to workforce programs, to drug courts. It's going to require an adjustment of resources. These things are not going to happen with just goodwill or good ideas.
That was kind of President Obama's part of his speech earlier this month on criminal justice reforms, that what you're talking about is pretty much all in his reform. Let me ask you, Martin O'Malley was the only former governor of Maryland who spoke, was the only one of the candidates who really answered the league's call for a specific plan, and he laid out his criminal justice reform. But he got what I thought was a very lukewarm reception to that plan.
So I think Governor O'Malley's got work to do to get better known. I think not a lot of people know Governor O'Malley, and Jeb Bush is universally known. Hillary Clinton is universally known. Bernie Sanders has, if you will, seized a singular issue that resonates with large portions, the disaffection and the disaffection with the status quo.
Right.
Ben Carson is known and I think admired as a neurosurgeon. This foray into politics, people's reaction to him may be a lot. I know in our community, he's seen as a doctor, not as a politician.
Right. Mark Morial, what a pleasure to speak
Thanks.
with you, and thanks for, at the end of 4 exhausting but exhilarating days, taking the time to come in and speak with us.
And let me thank the Broward community, and thank you all. The Broward community really came through with flying colors, did an excellent job to make sure we had a good conference, and I hope people are going back charged up in that they'll visit Broward again.
Maybe hiring you for the Chamber of Commerce, too. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, up next, an interview with the mayor of Miami Beach, Philip Levine. In last week's show, I had some critical things to say about a political action committee on Miami Beach and its arm-twisting tactics to raise money. This morning, the mayor gets a chance to respond. In my personal perspective last week, I took aim at a political action committee on Miami Beach called Relentless for Progress. It's headed by Miami Beach Commissioner Jonah Wolfson, who appears to be using some high-handed, high-pressure tactics to raise money that will be used to elect a slate of 3 commission candidates, all of whom support Mayor Philip Levine. And Mayor Levine joins us this morning to, as Paul Harvey used to say, the other side of the story. So where do you think I was off base?
Well, Michael, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, because you know how much I respect you. I always say you're the Walter Cronkite of South Florida.
Oh, my goodness, that's kind.
But
he's
kind. Older, you're younger. So, but Michael, you know, when I ran for mayor of Miami Beach 2.5 years ago, I encountered a city that was a convention center that was off track, a police department that was unfortunately out of control, streets that were flooding. We had no idea what we were going to do. And I decided to run because I wanted to represent our people. And what I did is I actually self-financed my campaign.
Right.
I raised money, but under $100.
Yeah. But you also knocked on, I say admiringly, Philip, you knocked on hundreds of doors. It wasn't, you just didn't buy the office.
No.
But here's my question. You ran to bring integrity, root out corruption, and here you are involved in this political action committee, which, among other things, seems to violate the very ordinances of the city of Miami Beach, which says a city vendor or real estate developer may not directly or indirectly, in fact, we can put the ordinance up. Well, here is the ad that is being paid for by the PAC. But anyway, the ordinance says city vendors and real estate developers and associates may not be solicited for campaign contributions for commission or mayoral candidates. But that, it appears that's
Michael,
exactly what's happening.
let me answer your question, because I think the information that you stated is not correct. Our city attorney, who's been with the city for over 20 years, and the previous city attorney, has said not only is it appropriate for political action committees to raise money, but it's also 100% legal. That particular law was not intended to, in any way, react to PACs. And as you know, the county has, Mayor Jimenez has a PAC, the city of Miami, all the county commissioners
everybody's got PACs, Philip. There's no question about that.
But I think it's important to say that, you know, when I ran for mayor, I put my money where my mouth is. I'm running for re-election. I'm going to be filing at the end of the month, opening a campaign account, and I'm putting my own money in again. And of course, you know, Michael, I don't take a salary. I don't take any expenses whatsoever. I'm doing this because I want to get Miami Beach and maintain it. But let me answer your question about the PAC.
Yeah.
Commissioner Wolfson decided to open this PAC because a very dear friend of mine by the name of Ricky Arriola is running for commissioner, and he's a pillar of our society. He was being attacked by these shady groups that were trying to, you have no idea who the donors are, and Commissioner Wolfson said he won't stand for it, and he decided to raise money to help to make sure that we maintain the progress.
Mr. Mayor, that's all well within the bounds of traditional politics, particularly on Miami Beach here. here is part of the brochure that Commissioner Wolfson sent out asking neighbors, here's why I'm raising the money. And it says, quote, over the next few months, I will look closely at who is running to serve our community on the city commission. I will fight to get the right people and the money from the PAC, and it's $1 million
Well, let me ask
in
you.
the last report. But, Mr. Mayor, again, soliciting money, whether your city attorney thinks it's legal or not, it strikes me as unethical.
Well, I think
to go to your city vendors who have contracts or want city contracts and say to them, do you want to make a donation? How can they say
Michael,
no?
I think if you look at the PAC that Commissioner Wolfson formed, you're going to find out that 80% of these are just residents of Miami Beach that are very successful,
Right.
that want to give back because they like the direction of our city. But I think there's a bigger issue here. I think it's a county issue, it's a state issue, it's a federal issue. Remember, Michael, I self-finance my campaign, so it doesn't affect me whatsoever. But I think what I would say is, why would they focus on one particular PAC that's been so successful because our city's been successful? Why wouldn't the ethics board look at all the PACs? Look at Mayor Jimenez's PAC. Look at the PACs of the Raquel Regalado. And I want to show this because I think that we know what's going on in our community right now is PACs. I mean, Senator Rubio has received $3 million from Larry Ellison. He received $5 million from Norman Brayman.
Right.
This is prevalent through our entire country.
And Jeb Bush got $3 million from Mike Hernandez.
Yes.
Fernandez. So, yeah, no, this is politics as usual, and maybe the Ethics Commission or the legislature or other governmental entities should look at the PACs. Well, maybe they ought to look at the Citizens United decision if you want to go
I
back
agree with you 100%.
even further.
If you would like to move forward on it, I'm right next to you.
Okay, well,
I'm going to call you Pac-Man.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask you, did you get on the phone with Commissioner Wolfson in the last few months and take part in these conversations to these businesses on the beach,
Michael,
and say, please make a contribution?
Michael, I absolutely made calls and asked them to contribute to this. Matter of fact, I did more than make calls. I actually wrote a check myself to Relentless for Progress because I think that we need to maintain the direction the city is going in, get things done. And I think it's important that we all do that.
Yeah.
But once again, why are we focused? You know what some people are saying, Michael, and I don't believe it. Some people are saying they're taking aim at this PAC because they're scared that maybe I'm going to run countywide. Or maybe I'm going to run statewide in the future.
Well, I
hope
no
that's
fear.
not the case.
I think that you may have higher political ambitions, and more power to you if you choose to run for the county or the state senate, or if Hillary Clinton is elected president, you're very close to her and Bill Clinton. Maybe you will become the ambassador to, represent the United States abroad. But again, that's all kind of far afield. My question this morning, Philip Levine, is very simple. Is it kosher for the Political Action Committee, Relentless for Progress, to be going to city vendors and developers and businesses, and here's a list of who they are. We all know who they are because this has been reported. Is this right? Is
Michael,
this appropriate?
right now, this is the world we live in. It's appropriate, it's legal. If we want to change the laws, I would be the first to do it. I think we should. Because remember something, Michael, I self-finance my campaign. I don't need the money. And I think, but we should do it. So I count on the county. I say they should change these laws. Let me tell you the two things we've done in Miami Beach already. Number one, unlike the county, the state website, which shows who's contributed to every PAC, is now on our local website. It's very important, so now our residents can see. And we're now pushing for legislation in September. I've told the city attorney during the last meeting, let's make sure that every elected official in Miami Beach, if you're raising money for a PAC, you need to register, just like they do in Tallahassee.
Well, good.
And we call upon the county to do the same thing with that mayor and with those county commissioners, who, by the way, as you know, Michael, they all have PACs and they all raise money from the same vendors and suppliers. So what's good for the goose should be good for the gander.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you on that, and just I want to make sure on the record that I have no question, no qualms about running a slate of candidates. That's a time-honored tradition everywhere in this country. So that's not the question. The question is, these candidates the three candidates who support you are going to get money from this Political Action Committee, from city vendors and developers. And I just have to ask you again, Phil,
So,
is this right? Is this legit?
Michael, can I disagree with you? Number one, they're not receiving money from me.
Heart's
Commissioner Wolfson, that's his PAC. I've endorsed no candidates for commission at this point, and I'm not sure who I'm going to endorse. But I think what you need to do is, remember, you know what kind of season this is right now? This is political. This is election season.
It is.
We have two commissioners who are termed out. One of them wants her husband to become a commissioner.
Right.
He's received no support from the community. He's received no support from the commissioners who do not want him up there. So we have a disgruntled commissioner. We have another commissioner who wanted to be a police officer, who failed an ethics test.
Ed Tobin.
And that's another commissioner who's very disgruntled. So, you know, we have a couple of months to go. We have an election in November. I went through this 2 years ago. I never forget, they called me anti-Hispanic. They told me I was Raul and Fidel Castro's business partner. But the message of politics today is people want real people that lay it on the line, the same way I answer your questions.
All right. Well, I'm so glad you came in this morning. And just not to put too fine a point on it, but what you were saying is what Commissioner Wolfson and Relentless for Progress is doing is on the up and up, and you're fine with it.
100%, but I think that we should call on the county to change the laws so that everyone's on the same playing field. Because remember, you don't want to single out one PAC. That starts to stink, Michael. It starts to stink.
All right, let's have the Ethics Commission look at all PACs. As far as I'm concerned, that's all right with me.
Me too.
All right, Philip Levine, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. All right, still to come, some analysis and opinion about the week's top stories. We are going to, yes, take it to the round table. That is next.
After clearly one of the busiest weeks of news yet this summer, it is time to take it all to the round table, and we have a good one this morning.
Do we ever? Joining us for the first time is Carolyn Glenna. She is the executive editor of the Miami Times, also has been a journalist and editor at the South Florida Times and the Miami Herald. Rosemary O'Hara is a familiar voice and face on the round table. Glad to welcome her back, editorial page editor at the Sun Sentinel. And we also welcome back Justin Safey, an attorney who is active in state politics, particularly Republican Party politics. He is the publisher of a widely read news site, SafeyReview.com. Can't live without it. Got to go there to find out what's going on. Justin,
Good morning.
thank you. Carolyn, great to have you. Rosemary?
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so
Oh, well, thank you. We have to talk about the conference first and all of the candidates. Justin, let's start out with you.
Sure.
You worked with Jeb Bush. He showed up, and the 5 of them that showed up there, you watched. I'm going to guess everybody saw bits and pieces. Your take on the candidates at the National Urban League Conference?
Well, of course, you know, I think the big story out of this was Governor Bush, Republican candidate for president, going and speaking at the Urban League. When he announced here in Miami on June 15th, he said he was going to campaign in every community. He was going to get outside his comfort zone. He said that as a Republican, if a Republican is going to win the presidency, that's what's needed to be done. And I think this was a tangible example of that. And I think he laid out his record as Florida governor, which was very impressive in terms of African-American contracting, in terms of the people he put on the judiciary here in Dade County and all across the state of Florida, and also his record on education. The improvement in minority student learning, especially at the younger grades, he laid that record out. I also thought it was interesting that Hillary Clinton, in this nonpartisan forum, decided to really punch Jeb Bush in the mouth with a pretty negative attack. And I felt that it was a little bit insecure of her. To me, it demonstrated some fear that Governor Bush was actually going to make some inroads in what's been traditionally a Democratic constituency of African-American voters. So I found that interesting.
Yeah,
he was on stage at the time, behind the scenes.
yeah, Carolyn, you heard all those candidates. I was not there, but I've listened to the tape and seen the speeches. It seems to me that Hillary was kind of feisty and tough, but I mean, that's within the bounds of political, you know, debate and campaigning.
As Mayor Levine said, we're in campaign season. This is political season. And I think that she didn't name him, but she named his PAC.
Right to Rise,
so,
yeah.
Right to Rise.
Five times.
Which, you know, she was making a point that basically these are the things that he still is against. Voting rights, you know, those things we can't ignore.
He's against Obamacare and would phase out Medicare in favor of another system. But Rosemary, what did you think about the candidates and what they said?
Well, I agree with Justin that it was a plus for Jeb to go to the event, and I'm disappointed that Marco couldn't find the time in his calendar to attend an event like this that was in his backyard. As for Hillary, frankly, I like it, mix it up. To just get up there and just say the same old thing or talking points. I would rather, let's hear it. It's why Donald Trump or Joe Biden, why some people get excited by these campaigns, is that these people are talking honestly. And I think that when Hillary takes it to them, that let's hear it. Let's get it going.
And showing up is just not enough, really. You know, his energy was just so low. I mean, the two Republican candidates, Ben Carson and Jeb, their energy was just so low. They seemed resigned, like, I'm just here because I should be here, because it's the right thing to do. But really and truly, I didn't hear a message that was going to resonate with the people. I mean, once Hillary walked out on the stage, you know, everybody was roaring at Hill. So she definitely delivered exactly what she came to do.
Well, she was a tough act to follow. She was number 2. Well, but what about the other 2 candidates? I mean, maybe sometimes subdued, and this is on television also, subdued and gracious comes across as boring when actually it's just very well-intended and well-meaning. But what about the rest of them? What about Bernie Sanders, who draws crowds? Ben Carson, we're looking at right now.
Well, they were there, they spoke, they made their case. But the fact of the matter is those other candidates aren't polling very well right now. They really haven't started to get a lot of traction. So I think they deserve credit for going there and speaking and being part of the summit, the national summit. But at the same time, we're not going to hear as much about what they said just because they're not doing as well in the polls as, say, a Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton or the other candidates.
You know, Rosemary and everyone, I'm pretty sure we all realize, people at home realize, that it's one thing to strike the people in the room as being a little cool or not excited enough. But the fact of the matter is, Jeb Bush is speaking to them, but he's speaking to the nation. He's speaking to voters everywhere. So the people on the other end of the television sets who watched him, I think, may have gotten a pretty good impression.
Right, and I would add to that in Florida, that so much, it all comes down to Florida. And part of the point of this is, can Hillary get the black vote in Florida that Obama did? And if Jeb is the eventual nominee, if he can get just a slice of that, a small slice of that, he can win Florida and he can win. So he was well positioned.
And that's what's really remarkable about this. Typically, to win the presidency, you lock down your base, you get your base locked down, and then you start to move to the middle and you start to run a general election campaign. Jeb Bush is going after Hillary Clinton's base in July of 2015. That's a pretty remarkable thing for him to be doing, and I think it shows what type of campaign that he's going to run for the next 12 months.
And then how does that play?
It still is 14% that he would need, so it's not just a slice. I think that's not a sliver. That is a big chunk to get 14% of the black vote.
And he believes he can do it based on the record that he laid out. I mean, if you look at the speech that he gave, and he talked about his record of appointments, increasing minority contracting, increasing education performance of African American students in the state of Florida.
His appointments, excuse me, Justin, but his appointments to the bench, he appointed more African American men and women to the bench than any governor in the history of Florida.
He did, and I had the pleasure of serving on the Judicial Nominating Commission as his appointee here in Miami-Dade County. Statewide, African-American judges went up 43%, and Governor Bush appointed a lot of African-American judges here in Dade County. Orlando Prescott is one of them, circuit court judge, and the first Haitian-American judge, Fred Serafin,
but
appointed here in Dade County.
But he has a lot of downsides, too. I mean, he ended affirmative action in going to college. There were the voting purge. There was
minimum mandatory.
Right. The felon restoration.
Free strikes, you're out.
The stand your ground. When that starts getting focused on in the campaign, then we will hear a more robust conversation.
Sure, absolutely. But he was there. He was the one who signed the law that expanded early voting in Florida. It wouldn't have happened but for Jeb Bush's signature on that law, which has increased access to the ballot for a lot of African Americans. And I think that those things will all be debated during the campaign. I think he's got a great record to run on. I'll put his record up against Hillary Clinton's record in terms of what she did in the Senate while she was there.
Carol, last word for you on this segment on a Republican that African Americans can get their arms around. Who's on that slate?
No one.
With that, we'll be right back.
Good.
As president, I would increase American influence in Cuba rather than reduce it. I would work with Congress to lift the embargo, and I would pursue additional steps.
That was Hillary Clinton at FIU on Friday, calling to lift the embargo on Cuba. She was unequivocal. She has, Rosemary, sort of skirted taking strong stands on so many issues, but on this one, boy, it was just no question. But she has been against the embargo since 2009, so this wasn't exactly a revelation or a new position, just stated strongly in the heart of Cuban exile Miami.
That's right.
Location, location, location.
That's right. Yeah, she came to the heart of Miami to make a speech that's half of Miami is divided by. But it's not all of Miami. I mean, let's recognize that too. Miami today is not the Miami of yesterday. And polling in Miami shows that it's a generational divide. Older Cuban Americans want the embargo. Younger Cuban Americans would like to see a different approach. And one of the things in the polling that I think ought to be remembered is that if this is about helping the Cubans, if we really want to help the Cubans, you know, have a better way of life, the polling there, the one poll there, showed 96% of Cubans want this embargo, want this barricade gone. That doesn't mean that it's a good regime or we can trust them, but let's keep in mind what the Cubans want too.
You think those polls allowed a comfort level to have her come here and stand up and say that?
It might have, but you know, I would say look at what President Obama did. He didn't announce his new policy towards Cuba until after the elections in November of 2014. If he didn't think that it was something that would put some Democratic candidates at risk, he would have done it before. All the Cuban American representatives in Congress all support the embargo. So, you know, I'm not sure exactly why I mean, obviously she's taken this position, but politically, I still think it's not necessarily the winning issue that she thinks it's going to be, but she's got to do everything she can to support it.
And she has to contrast herself from Marco Rubio, son of Cuban exiles and immigrants, and, well, not exiles, but immigrants. And of course, Governor Bush is a strong supporter of the current policy, doesn't think there should be more trade and travel than there is.
Right, and I would just also point out, you know, I think that the Miami Herald editorial board had it right when they said, look, there needs to be some progress for human rights, for democracy in Cuba before you do something as dramatic as lifting the embargo. President Obama's policy of opening up, there's been more repression since he announced these openings in Cuba. The ladies in white today are probably marching as we speak, and they're probably being harassed by the government. If that type of harassment took place in Selma, Alabama, or in Charleston, South Carolina, people would be calling for boycotts of those cities. If government officials were doing what they do to the ladies in white right now in Havana, they would be doing the same thing.
But we have relations with governments that are not democratically elected. If that is going to be our foreign policy, then we can't have relations with China. We can't have relations with Saudi Arabia.
It sends a terrible message to those other human rights oppressors around the world when we automatically lift a sanctioned regime in place without any progress whatsoever. Can't President Obama get some type of progress for human rights and democracy? We had a reporter for the Daily Business Review, Julie Kay, went down there with the Florida Bar Association, and she got harassed for filing a report that she did while she was down there. There's nothing.
We talked about that.
I like to, yeah, we had some people from on that trip to Cuba, and we talked about that. Of course, I remember what A.J. Liebling, the great press critic, once said, the press is free as long as you own one. And in Cuba, it's owned by Fidel.
Can we talk a little bit about a censoring of another kind? Uber finally out in Broward by their own accord. What happens in Broward County now that the ride-sharing services are not there? Can the county fill in where that vacuum is going to be?
I don't think you're going to find anybody in Broward County who's satisfied with the current state of transportation or the lack of leadership in our county on what we're going to do about transportation. There's been a big backlash from the business community, from the riders who feel, the issue is public safety. But a lot of people, when they get in a cab that's dirty, that the credit card machine doesn't work, the GPS doesn't work, they don't feel so safe. This isn't about public safety. This is about money and old politics versus new and entrepreneurship.
And I think, less regulation, more transportation, basically. There are parts of our city we know that people just cannot get around. They get left on main lines. They can't get home that short distance. Uber serves that purpose. It brings jobs. I don't see where regulation is working in the cab communities. You get into a cab, you cannot tell that anyone is watching the industry. It's dirty. Sometimes you don't have air conditioning. Sometimes you can't pay with a credit card. So regulation's not working. So less regulation, more transportation.
Well, it's going to be, unfortunately, the final word, but
Amen to that is the last
a good
word.
way to end it. But, you know, you're right. There's going to have to be some compromise, some leadership in Broward on Uber and Miami-Dade as well. All right, thank you all. Great roundtable.
Thanks so much.
Terrific.
Great to see you.
Happy to be here.
And when we come back, a renewed focus on police body cameras, why they work and why they don't.
Sunday weather, what will it look like? Well, it looks like this. This is the view from the Hollywood Beach Cam.
Let's check in with Weather Authority meteorologist Jennifer Correa with your Sunday forecast.
Happy Sunday, South Florida, and good afternoon. Temperatures hitting those upper 80s. Eventually, we'll get into those low 90s, but it does feel much warmer than what the actual temperature is at. And take a look at this. In the 90s, it feels like the upper 90s and the triple digits down in Marathon. Winds continue to be out of the southeast, anywhere between 5 to 10 miles per hour. We'll continue with the cloud cover out there, but we'll still reach a high of 91 degrees, with a chance of a few afternoon storms today.
Jennifer, thanks. This week, we saw compelling evidence of how a body camera on a police officer worked, and at the same time, how it did not. By now, you've seen that simple traffic stop in Cincinnati, the benign turn ugly and then deadly. Officer Ray Tensing not only shot Sam Dubose in the head over a missing license plate, but lied to superiors that he'd been dragged by the moving car and feared for his life. Because the camera Tensing was wearing documented otherwise, that officer is now indicted for murder. But the bigger issue may be that body camera did not stop the shooting death of another person of color. The officer knew full well his words and his actions were being recorded, an awareness that experts have said should affect the way officers decide to act. But this time, it didn't. That stop in Cincinnati indicates the body cameras promoted nationally as a breakthrough in holding officers accountable are not a cure-all. But that doesn't discount their ability to be critical tools. Sam Dubose, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, their names have become hashtags in the furious and frustrated call for policing reform, only because there were people with cameras around to record what happened in those encounters with police. The stats that back the push for body cameras are hard to ignore. Significant drops in use of force and in citizen complaints. Body cameras are good for good police officers and bad news for bad officers. Cameras do and will play a critical role in justice, and departments are right to fund them and deploy them. But this week, we are reminded that the focus of good policing should be on the people wearing them. So what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like.
And you can email us, Facebook, Twitter. We know all those media platforms, and at least Glenna responds. Well, I do too occasionally. Anyway, we're easy to find, and we love hearing from you. And remember, stay informed, get involved.
Have a great Sunday.